I would like to introduce the author of this book, Mr. Crisci. We opened a new page in my life in Washington because it's the first experience about the books, discussion, books, introduction. Okay, welcome.
To start with, I am what I call an ordinary American. I've had some good business success, but I am just an ordinary American. My father was a butcher. My mother was a telephone operator. And so what I represent in terms of my points of view is not the intellectual point of view or the highly informed. I'm part of what we call the great unwashed. I'm part of the 210 million people or 250 million people that do not understand Russia, do not understand the culture, do not understand the history.
Till today?
Excuse me?
Till today?
To today. But everybody asks me why. Why did I do the book? And by the way, it's now in English and Russian, which is another whole story. And that picture, by the way, sits in a little tiny museum in Krasny Luch. It is the only known actual portrait of her that was made by an artist many, many years ago. And so it's in this little museum. You also notice, so here's what happened, okay? In 1996, I'm on business in Miami Beach. And I get in a cab. And the fellow says, "Where do you want to go?" But he doesn't say, "Where do you want to go?" He goes, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Where are you from?" And he says, "Moscow." And he then tells me he has a PhD in computer sciences. His wife has a computer sciences degree. And he has 2 children, and they came over in 1989. We drive a little bit, and I say to him, "What is the most surprising thing that you have found in America in the 6 or 7 years you've been here?" And he turns around to me and he basically says, "Do you really want to know?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, 30 million dead and nobody remembers. I didn't even know what he was talking about. He explained, that in the war, and so I went home and talked to my father-in-law because he was in the war. And he said, that Stalin killed all those people. That's why that happened. And the whole thing, I did nothing. I just went back to business and said, something doesn't sound right. And then, 3 years later, I'm in San Diego, and there is an exhibition called World War II Through Russian Eyes. And I saw all the pictures that Galina was talking. I saw for the first time ordinary people, just like all the Americans, that went through World War II, and I saw the letters and all these things, and I was really moved. At that point, I said, I guess I'm supposed to do something. And so my first idea was, at the time, Tom Brokaw, the NBC anchor, had written a book called The Greatest Generation. And it was very popular, and I said, well, maybe I should do a book called, the Great Patriotic War Generation, or The Great Patriotic Generation, and it would be stories of individual families and how the war impacted them. I'm not a military person, and I'm not a historical person. I'm a human person. All of my experience is in consumer behavior and motivation. I've spoken all around the world on those. So I said, maybe there's a human part to this that hasn't been explored. So that was my original starting point. So, of course, where do you go today? The first place everybody goes for research is the internet. You don't go to the library anymore. So I come upon Yulia, and I said, it's really interesting, but here's the thing. There are 5 different versions of her. Where she died, where she didn't die. There's even a person in America, a very famous person about history, who's saying, well, it was heard that she defected to the German side, and she was heard on a radio in Germany. And then I noticed somebody is selling airplane models of her plane. And then there are T-shirts. And so I'm saying, what is going on here? And so that's what led me. I said, well, what does an American do who's confused? Well, obviously what you do is you write a letter to Vladimir Putin, and you say, you just say, hey, I'm this guy in America who knows nothing about Russia, but I want to do this book about a Russian hero. And of course, I get surprised, no response. Well, I send an email, I send to the PR, I send it wherever I could find an address, which is not easy, and I heard nothing. And then 3 months later, the Postmaster General from the Ukraine emails me and says, we've spent some time processing your request, and here's who you have to meet. She is expecting to hear from you, and her name is Valentina Venashenko. And Valentina is the person, the one person in the world that spent the 36 years from when Lelia got shot down till she found that those plane parts, and that the body, which I'll talk about in the central grave in a minute. So you need to talk to her. This has been her life's work. And then they said, you also need to talk to these wonderful young children who have built a monument, and they're called the Scouts of Glory, and they've been working with this lady for 36 years every summer, going out in the countryside, sort of combing for parts. And then they said, and then of course, since you're American, and you probably don't speak Russian, we've organized an English teacher, a Ukrainian English teacher to help you. So we had this Russian museum curator in this tiny museum, the English teacher, and the kids. So I said, okay. And so away we went. What we did in Moscow, what Marianne arranged, was we said, we need some help in terms of the language. But we told people that worked with us, we don't want to go see palaces and mosques and all the standard, stereotypical things. We want to see everyday life. So we wound up with this retired school teacher. His name was Gennady Kutsinov. And he was, and by the way, I will destroy the Russian language, and I apologize. And Gennady was wonderful. He understood what we were talking about, and so he did great things for us. Let me explain to you why I decided to go from a family story to an individual. I said, if I'm trying to get through to people in a broad way, making it a broad palette may not be the most engaging way to do it. And so I said, given that she was a woman and accomplished things in a man's world that nobody had accomplished at that point, it seemed like she could be a terrific vehicle to kind of tell the story that we're more alike than we're different, and people need to understand that. And then secondly, that to sort of give you an understanding, a little bit of the culture. We worked hard at that, without trying to be a historian or an expert on the Russian world. So this is, she was 9. This is a very good friend of hers at the time. That was Ludmila. Ludmila was 6 at the time. And this is that house today. It still stands exactly where it did back then. One of the things they used to do was really to taught the kids how to jump the puddles when it rained. It was a kids' game they played. This is me in front of the house. The apartment still stands. There's the doors. And so this is Ludmila today. She is the last living friend of Lelia. We also met Yelena. Now, Yelena taught us something else. We talked about history with her, and again in human terms. Now we were finished in Moscow. Now we had to go find out where the heck did she wind up. And so we then took another 9 hours to travel to Donetsk. So we went to Donetsk, then we had to drive to Krasny Luch, and then we had to travel from there. We had this wonderful young lady that was a friend of friends, Valia, who helped us in Donetsk. Then we met Valentina and Yelena. Now, this is Valentina today. She's not well. She's 78. She's got a weak heart. And I promised her we were going to figure out how to get money into that museum to help grow it. Her dream is to take those things at her museum, the things that are in Moscow, put them together and let people know. And this was her student, who's now the English teacher. So this is the three of us. There's a school. It's called the Lilia Litvak School. And, this was the plane. So it signified the plane at school number 1. It's a modest school, as many of the schools already saw. And the other thing is the stuff that Valentina has collected. This, as you know, means keep your memory, keep the memory going forever. She has the sewing machine that Anna, Lilia's mother, taught her how to sew on. She has all the posters. I'll tell you about, there's a very famous war poster that she had. This is the portrait I was telling you about. These are the fragments from the plane. And this is the proclamation from President Gorbachev when he named her a hero of the Soviet Union. So this little thing here is a group of weeds that Valentina took from the gravesite in 1977. And she said, here they sit, 30-something years later, and it never fell over or wilted. And so, for her, that's a point. And the other thing is the children here and the families. One of the things I've learned about Russian culture is you do pass on tradition and things, and you really do work hard at that. And these kids had songs they made up to her. These are the teachers that helped. We got applauded when we came in. It was just, an amazing experience. This is the principal of the school. These are the kids out in the little village called near Markovia. So they all understand what they have, and they're just kind of, would somebody help? And Lil is everywhere. This is the monument that was built to her out there. These are the 15 planes she shot down. You may wonder why I picked the name call sign White Lily. She loved lilies. She had a lily painted on the side of her plane. The lily is on the side of her monument there. And so her real call sign was White Lily. And that's where the name comes from. The plane, the reason there aren't more pieces of plane around is because they're in this statue that was made by those children that are now architects. So you find that on the walls. There's plaques by the building. This is part of her gravesite, and there's those flowers I was telling you about. So anyway, Lilia's grave. This is sort of a pretty, for me, I didn't know what I expected, but this is the road we drove on another hour after the 3 hours to Krasny Luch to get to here, which was out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And that is her gravesite. There's a little off to the right. There's a piece of a monument, and so we left some flowers and everything. So that's where and that's why nobody found her. I mean, we're talking the absolute middle of nowhere, and so you can understand why the body was lost for 36 years. This was my intent, and I think this is important to relate here. I am not trying to tell a war story. This is a coming-of-age story of a young lady who liked fireflies and lilies and competed with the boys in skating, and the number 44 comes her as her favorite number that's on her jersey, and you'll get to see all that. So it's really, not. Now the other thing is, if you really, have enough vodka, you may want to read it a few times, and you'll find different things when you read it. I call this layered. The other thing is, I thought it ought to be a tribute to women. I mean, this book is basically saying that long before anybody was thinking of women's pride and women's equality, here was a lady who somehow managed to get herself into the service and become the first woman flying a plane, which was definitely inferior to the Germans. It's also, in my way, it's as an ordinary citizen to other Russian people, it's a belated thank you for what you went through in the war, and I told you about the title. So
thank you very much, because when we start with this project, the author and my wife, they make a big, huge attack to my mind, because I'm thinking, what is the project, how it will be, but I think it's interesting. Thank you, and welcome to reception. Thank you.
кажется порою, что солдат с кровавых не пришедшие полей не в землю нашу полегли когда-то, а превратились в белых журавлей.